what we were doing last time, we were validating the idea of each of the
the relationship between the fourth keyword of each primary in the center.
Oh, that's right, the fourth keyword, yeah. So let's just quickly go over that again. Would you like to do that, Richard, so that you're clear about it?
I wish I could, James. So let's take no to goodbye. We're looking at the relationship between truth and freedom.
Would you like this on the screen, or would you like to see people?
On the screen, please.
On the screen.
I'm looking at the screen, so thank you for that. Now, truth, the relationship between truth and freedom. There is the expression, the truth sets us free. Is there more to say than that? Does anybody want to contribute to that, or do you want me to carry on?
Well, this is going further than we did. Maybe we will do this. Let's discuss that. Let's start there and see where we go. There is a relationship between truth and freedom, and Richard has said that the truth sets us free. Let's just discuss that, which is exactly the direction I wanted to go in today, so it fits nicely. Do you know where that phrase comes from?
I associate it with the Bible, but
yeah. Does it ring a bell? I mean, is it an aphorism that you agree with?
Intellectually, yes. If you asked me for an anecdote from my life, when have you exercised speaking truth to set you free? I would really struggle.
Yeah, go on, Don.
I just think that truth, in my experience, sets you free, because if it's not truthful, then there's lots of binds, contracts, agendas, defenses that are in there. Therefore, there isn't freedom, because we're tied in knots of defense, denial, whatever is not in truth.
Richard, put us on non-sharing, because we've got the relationship between truth and freedom in our heads now. Yeah, so you're saying if you're in non-truth, if you're lying, then you're tied up in the lie.
For all different kinds of reasons, denial, defensiveness.
Absolutely, and yeah, absolutely. Okay, other comments?
There's something so undefended about truth, isn't there? If you're going to stand in your truth, it's a bit like a no.
There's also the expression freedom from and freedom to. So if you, which is power. Yeah, nice, like it.
Which is?
The association between truth, freedom and power. We're on the path of power, and to get from knownness through to goodbye maybe requires the power, the courage to speak the truth, which will then set you free.
Are you saying power and courage are synonymous? Synonymous? You know what synonymous means?
I know what synonymous means. I'm saying no, power is not.
No, it's not.
Courage.
So you can't. Then be specific. You can't say power and courage in the same sentence.
Okay.
Some people need courage to find their power, but not everybody.
Fine, but we're discussing power. We've got power. Yeah. Are we saying that truth and freedom are aspects of power?
I think so. It would be hard to be in my power if I didn't feel I could be in truth and freedom.
What's the difference?
I think freedom is the result of power, of having being powerful enough to speak your truth, being courageous enough to speak your truth.
You've done it again.
I did it deliberately. I did it consciously then.
And discuss the relationship between power and courage.
In order to be courageous, there's an element of power, I think, from my personal experience, that you need to engage.
So power is a necessary but not a sufficient quality of courage.
That's what I've said, yeah.
All right. I just want to know what you were saying. Carry on.
What was
Sharon.
I saying?
I said, before we do, could I just ask the question, does the truth need to be spoken?
Ah, different question.
We keep talking about speaking our truth, but
I don't think
is that necessary to be in our power to speak it?
not ultimately. No, I don't think so.
Give an example of when it wouldn't be.
Well, just that I think that when you are really in your power and you're in you, everything just will move around that.
So what if you're in a relationship and you know that you no longer love your partner?
Well, that's one situation where it might be useful to communicate it, but I think there's loads of finding your own power in individuating yourself that would mean that you would do the inner work and it would reflect in your relationship without it necessarily having to be said. That's power.
Okay.
Not outsourcing any bit of yourself to somebody else having to show up or behave or listen or, whatever it is that you
Can we get back to the statement, the truth will set you free? Let's just get back to that. We haven't actually understood that aphorism fully yet. I'm going to come to that in a minute. Do we agree that the truth of that aphorism, or is that subject to conditions? The truth shall set you free. Is that always the case, or is it sometimes the case?
I mean, on a practical level, telling the truth sometimes will not set you free. Sometimes
put you in prison, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you're under some military regime and you point out that the emperor has no clothes, you find yourself in jail.
Yeah, even though you haven't broken any laws of morality in that particular example. Whereas if you'd murdered somebody and you told the truth, you're going to prison, maybe you deserve it. In this particular example, you tell the truth and it's not welcome, so you're going to lose your freedom. So we're not talking about the freedom indicated by your presence or absence in prison. In that particular example, we're saying you tell the truth, the emperor has no clothes, and I will die or necessary for my principles. And that freedom is a soul freedom, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what that means. Now, is that what the aphorism means?
That's how I think of it. That's how
Is freedom ambiguous?
Yeah. Personal freedom versus physical freedom versus freedom of thought.
Surely truth is ambiguous too.
Truth is certainly ambiguous. Freedom's ambiguous. So what's the point in saying it? This thing that we're not sure about and that thing which you're not sure about, maybe they coexist. I mean, what are we saying here?
Make a good tea towel, that is it.
Truth and freedom are ambiguous. I love it. And it's true, isn't it?
So we're equating these two exalted keywords as the path of power, and we don't even know what we're talking about. There's something to discuss here, isn't there? So let me just see if I can recall the actual phrase. Know thee the kingdom of heaven, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So you have to enter the kingdom of heaven to find the truth, and you will then be set free. That's the biblical teaching. It's not the truth shall set you free. This is what people use because it's one of those aphorisms that sounds wise and actually isn't when you look into it.
So then we need to discuss, what do we mean by the kingdom of heaven?
Well, I think that's the easiest part of this formula, strangely enough. The kingdom of heaven is a state of being, the ultimate sacredness. You can say, well, that's ill-defined, but it's actually what we mean by that. Whatever's sacred to you, when you get to the extreme of that, that's the kingdom of heaven. It's not the kingdom of earth. It's not measured by coin or centimeters. So when you're in that exalted state, you should know the truth. Is that our personal experience? Have we ever been in that exalted state of the kingdom of heaven?
Well, sometimes I think that in spiritual practice, it's possible to feel absolutely free. You know, like there is nothing, there is no lack, there is nothing needed to be added to feeling in utter joy in an embodied sense in that moment. And
Lovely.
yeah.
All right, you've come at it from the other way, and I agree with you. Have we, all of us, experienced the freedom that's available through spiritual practice? Yeah? Okay. So did we find that truth was an important component in how we did that journey from not being in a kingdom of heaven to being free because we're in the kingdom of heaven? Did we have to go through truth?
Not sure.
No, I wouldn't have said so. Not necessarily.
I mean, for me, there would be a realization, a letting go of layers of humanness which are not truthful, but speak of lack and resentment or this or that or distress or disease or whatever.
Which is
So
false.
there is a sort of meeting that ultimately those things are not truthful. They're transitory, they move, you know. Whereas I would say that the place in the divinity kind of place, the spiritual practice place, is relentlessly, always and evermore reliable. So that for me keeps showing the truth. And if I get caught in knots, I feel like if I could come back to that, I know I will find a more truthful way to be.
I rather assumed when we were agreeing on what we meant by the kingdom of heaven that it lacked falseness. I don't think we can enter the kingdom of heaven unless we let go of all of our hypocrisy and our denials. How could you?
Yeah, exactly.
Surely
your projections, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Surely it's almost a truism to say that when you enter the kingdom of heaven, you should know the truth, because you can't get into the kingdom of heaven without knowing the truth. But what we're saying here is, yeah, it's a truism, and that doesn't mean it's not what we're saying. We're just giving attention to the fact that entering the kingdom of heaven and knowing the truth are synchronous events. That's helpful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Would you say that everybody who enters the kingdom of heaven in a collective worship is in the same state?
Same or similar. I mean, what we can't ever be in the same state in a perfect sense, but similar enough not to worry too much about the difference. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if in a collective act of worship there is one person who hasn't gone through truth,
then there's something wrong with the teaching. The teacher could not have done the job properly if that was the case. You can actually, if let's assume that the group that's a disparate, muddlesome group is pulled into the high state of the kingdom of heaven by somebody that knows what they're doing. What they're actually doing is moving to a high level of centeredness, within which anyone who's not in keeping with that you deal with them. You know, you have the power to deal with that. So you can take people who are uncentered, untruthful even, into that state of being, and you can raise them so that just for that moment they taste the kingdom of heaven. There are certain states, like I know this through the dance circle. There are certain groups that are just great, wonderful, lovely. We're having a great time. Everybody goes home. They say, "Oh, well, that was lovely, James. Thank you very much." And there are other groups when they say absolutely nothing. They just can't speak. And I live for the second, and I'm always a bit embarrassed when somebody compliments me for doing a good job. "Oh, that was great, James. Thank you so much." I'm like, "Oh dear, I failed again." You know, you don't need to thank the teacher when you're in that state. It's just like you get beyond all of that personal stuff and nobody says anything. So that's the difference that makes the difference. And in that state, the truth is that we're one. And we don't need to believe that from a book or a teacher. The truth is that we're one. We know, because there it is. How could we be anything other than know? One.
So did you go through it, or did you arrive at it?
Well, if somebody's actually not paying attention and I say, "Hey, you, listen to me," that's quite a truthful event, isn't it, for both parties?
Would you say truth and authenticity are synonymous?
Yeah.
Okay.
So last week, or possibly the week before, we touched on the idea that truth actually is in relationship with surrender. We had a lovely discussion around whether identity was choice or whether truth was choice, and we, I think, mostly came to the conclusion that truth was about surrender. So if truth is surrender, then on this, does the truth set you free? I feel like the way that phrase is worded, the truth will set you free, it's almost as though you've chosen this truth and it sets you free. Whereas it feels to me the kingdom of heaven enlightenment experience that we're talking about is a surrender to truth, where the experience of the kingdom of heaven is an unequivocal surrender.
It's a very tight philosophical point, this. I don't think that there has been a more important question asked in the 2,500 years of philosophy. I don't know whether you know, but Socrates had two students called Plato and Aristotle, and they both kind of thought Socrates was amazing, but they were rivals to each other. And one of them said, look, reality exists as it is, but we perceive it, all of us, differently. And the other one says, no, we create reality differently. And in all intents and purposes, it makes no difference at all. But the question that you're asking really is whether or not truth exists and we have to surrender to it, or whether we, when we are authentic, create truth. I would say this is the same debate that Aristotle and Plato had. Does anybody know enough to agree or disagree with me on that?
I mean, I know a little bit of my Greek philosophy. So the Platonic ideal, which is the more surrendering to a Platonic ideal, I can understand that. And that to me has been my experience. So my experience of being in a kingdom of heaven, an enlightened experience, felt more of the, it is just there. And when I eventually got out of my way and surrendered, it was as clear as the nose on my face.
Can I ask you a question here? Let's say you're in that state and you stay in that state and you introduce self-awareness. Is it possible to do that, or would you necessarily lose the state by trying?
No, I think it should be possible. It is possible. It
So
would be possible.
If you're conscious that you are surrendering to truth, is not the projection of consciousness onto that event selection of the truth to which you're surrendering?
Are you saying that it's kind of subjective in that moment then?
I am, and therefore you cannot actually say which is observer and which is observed in that moment, as indeed Plato and Aristotle couldn't do, as indeed in Heisenberg's kind of physics, you can't know the momentum and the place of a point. You know, it's that paradox in which we live, that we're trying to say, look, is it this or is it that? And the answer is no, which is the teaching of Zen, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Sufism is based on the teaching of paradox. That when you get to the nth degree of these very, very high mystical teachings and physics, quantum physics, they say, look, you don't know. You can't know. Stop asking a question like, what is the truth? It isn't like that, you know. And therefore, whether you surrender to it or whether you choose it is a matter of personal preference. From my male point of view, but from your point of view, if you wanted a more female approach, you'd surrender to it, and you'd have made that choice to surrender, though, wouldn't you? You know, it's just, you know, we get lost in sophistry, I think, at some point.
I'm glad that we're in good company, that we're having the same debate that was happening a few thousand years ago.
It's fascinating that nobody's managed to say anything really worth reading in 2,500 years.
They've always written that modern philosophy is just the side notes to that debate. Yeah.
I've got, I've studied philosophy in depth. It took me an hour. I got one of those books that summarized the 100 best philosophers, and it took me an hour to read it. And that was my knowledge of philosophy. So I ain't no expert. So somebody says that Kierkegaard said something new, and I think that Hegel did something really useful. His thesis, antithesis, and synthesis is, for my money, I think Hegel's the only one that said anything useful until Nietzsche came along, to be honest. But I've been told off for not acknowledging Kierkegaard. Anyway, back to the point.
It's interesting that surrender is one of the fourth keywords.
Yeah.
So in the center of this diagram, which is no longer on our screens, we've got truth and freedom and surrender. I don't know what the other four are at the moment.
Well, let's look now. I wanted to do that. Let's look.
I just did them.
We've got love. We've got communion. We've got faith, or the what we're using.
Freedom, faith,
release. Interesting. Freedom and release.
Surrender, truth, communion, love.
You can see a great similarity, can't you?
Yeah.
Love is freedom. Freedom is love. Love is communion. Communion is love. Love is surrender. Surrender is truth. Truth is release. Release is faith. I mean, wow. There must be a world in which these 7 exaltations are synonymous. Perhaps in the kingdom of heaven they're synonymous,
Yeah. I think they all definitely speak to the experience to which we were just discussing. Communion, love.
There's also some interesting pathways, politically incorrect it may be, but as well as the direct routes from all the way from no to goodbye, there are all sorts of other paths as well. There's an inner heptagon, for example.
And
I'm just noticing it. I had the question: is it necessary to walk the 7 paths in their fullness through each of the 8 keywords in order to get to the central Elven consciousness, or can you walk from no through boundaries, identity, choice, and truth, and arrive at Elven consciousness without doing the other 6.5 pathways?
when you've mastered Elven consciousness, then you're likely to be able to return to it at will. In fact, not likely, you're certain. That's what Elven consciousness is. Elven consciousness, like, let's look at it piecemeal. When we've mastered the path of power, we can choose whether goodbye or no is appropriate in any particular life scenario. And I wanted to introduce that facet of what we're doing today, the life applications, which is what Dom mentioned earlier. I think that's very important. So let's just take that one example, or a couple of examples. If we're strong on no and we're strong on goodbye, and we can do either at choice, then we're walking the path of power. And I think a powerful person gets that they can either just say no or goodbye. I could do either. I choose in this moment to say, look, no, you're not going to do that anymore. If you do, I'm going to say goodbye. Or they could just walk away and say, no. That's what power does for you. But if, for example, the path of magic links hello and please, when you're practicing magic, you can initiate a future, you can manifest a visionary future, please, or you could just be in communion with what's occurring and say hello. And whether or not you just deepen your understanding of what is, or you change it to what you want, that's the serenity prayer in a sense. When you're a master of magic, you don't have to change things just because you can. So when you've got that down, and all 7 of those things down, then if you have expanded your subtlety of mental facility, that you can hold alive 7 variables, and you make those 7 variables the path of power, the path of magic, the power of soul, then you're in a state of realized consciousness, Elven consciousness. This is mastery. And if you can do that at all, I would say you're realized. If you can do it really, really, really easily, then you're more realized. And if you can't do anything but that, you're enlightened. You know, playing around with words a little bit. And for us to get the facility of operating 7 variables at the same time, I think this is what we're probably going to have most difficulty with. Because what we're doing now, we're learning the system, we're philosophizing about it, we're seeing connections, all great, fascinating, lovely stuff, and relatively easy, considering what we've done to get here where we are. But you try and actually handle 7 variables simultaneously. That ain't easy. You know, we do it in a certain sense. We do it when we're driving a car quite easily, because we've got a huge amount of practice doing that. You think about what's in your mind when you're driving a car.
Mm.
You know, whether there's any kids going to run in front of the car is probably the first thing. You know, the second thing is traffic lights and that kind of, you know, the third thing is the sound of the engine. The fourth thing is your internal dialogue, how you're feeling, what you're going to do with the journey at the end of it. There's things going on, and you're multitasking on that level of probably 7. I haven't worked it out. But when you're actually, or if you're a manager of people with decision-making capacity, for you to be able to handle 7 such subordinates simultaneously would be a huge challenge. That's considered the upper limit of excellence in management. And those people who have got, like, let's say you start up a small business and you've got 7 guys doing work for you, and someone's seeing Mrs. Smith and someone's seeing Mrs. Jones, and someone's doing this and someone's doing that, and you're just dancing and you're handling and you're making phone calls. You got these 7 blokes, and then the 8th bloke, you take on the 8th bloke. Do you know what happens to your head? Like, duh, you can't handle any of them. Your head just explodes. For most people, 7 variables is hugely difficult. So what you need to do is to introduce a management tier, so that you've only got other managers doing the complexity. So what we're trying to do here is to master 7 different paths, so that at any point in our lives, we can make a decision about which path to employ. Whereas before, those of us who've been studying the 7-word system, we've come to a level where at any particular point we can respond according to one of the 7 words.
Mm.
So we've got that awareness of choice.
Yes.
You know, okay, this person's insulting me. I can conflict and do a goodbye number on them, or I can just say, well, who cares, and go to yes. Or I could say, oh, I'm interested that you said that. Can you say some more? Go into hello. We've got that facility. You move that into higher consciousness, and you're realizing that most of these interactions have got a polarization. And I'm saying, actually, they all have when it comes down to it. Every complex system can be reduced to the binary form. That's what computers are doing. Either yes or no to every single possibility. So what we're doing in this case is saying, instead of having one of the 7 words available, right, I'm going to be no-like. You could say, I'm going to have one of the paths available. Okay, I'm going to bring power to this situation. That gives me no and goodbye choices. Or I'm going to bring joy to this situation and have a good time. And if I was doing that, then I would say, thank you for doing that. Or, okay, I can accept that, whichever. You could interact and bring them down to the heart level, or you could just not care, go into the yes level. So that's what we're doing with this. That's what we will have when we've mastered this, is instead of 7 words, we'll have 7 paths, and that's a higher dimension. And when we can do that at will, we can choose which of those 7 paths we've got. Then I would say that's in keeping with being a realized being. Shall we move on and let's see the diagram again? because we were looking at truth and freedom and saying, you know, we need to enter the kingdom of heaven for truth to be free. I don't know if we finished that debate, but it was okay to leave it undecided. So
the next one was goodbye to yes, which would be freedom and surrender.
okay,
Have we discussed that?
let's discuss that one now. Let's get back to ordinary screen and discuss the relationship between freedom and surrender. What is surrender?
Well, I think we were discussing it before when Emma was talking about do we
So.
actively surrender to something that exists, or do we create what it is? It's not surrender to it, then you're choosing to do it, aren't you?
Yeah, so
Actively.
I mean, I think surrendering, first of all, let's just get one thing out of the way. Surrendering because you're powerless is not what we're discussing.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All right. So what might we choose instead of surrender?
You mean like if we weren't going to surrender, we'd be doing something else? We'd be holding on,
Okay.
or resisting, or defending against.
And
I would say creating.
all right.
I think that there's for me there's something about surrender being like grace. It's not something I can necessarily actively make happen, or it wouldn't be a surrender. But sometimes, if the conditions are right and I'm able to let go to something, you know, grace might take me there.
I think we need to discuss that, Don, because if you're saying that surrender is not a personal choice, is there not some element of coercion?
I think that it can be a choice, but just because you choose it doesn't mean you'll be able to access it. So something else, something more mysterious might need to happen. I'm thinking of birthing women. We want all birthing women to surrender to the pain of birth because it will be easier. Their cervix will open more easily if they can surrender to what's going on in the physiology of their body. But we could talk about that. We could give you loads of tools, but it doesn't mean that that's possible. And there is the sort of humility of our humanness, isn't there? I think there's something about integration of humanness and something more than that. And the grace kind of integrates or allows. But I don't know what that is, grace. What is grace? I mean,
sorry, Emma.
The miracle, I think. Grace is like a miracle.
Surrender to me speaks so much of trust. It reminds me of that awful physical somatic experience you can have, which I'm interestingly terrible at, where people stand in a circle and hold hands, and you're supposed to be able to just fall, and you have to trust that they will catch you, and it's very interesting seeing in your body if you can surrender to being caught by strangers or friends or a bunch of people at a festival or whatever it is. And to me, that's surrender.
Can you discuss the difference between that and faith?
I think faith exists in surrender. Other way around. I think surrender exists in faith. I think in order to have faith, there is a surrender. There is a surrender and a trust that a system will catch you, that a truth will catch, that an ultimate truth will catch you, that something will catch you.
What about you, Richard? What do you think about that? The relationship between surrender and faith is what we're discussing.
Yeah. Let me just write. Surrender and faith. I'm caught up a little bit in freedom from versus freedom to. Freedom from something I don't like. So I will surrender my power and hope and have faith in some other strong, more powerful being.
Really what we're talking about here. We're talking about whether the trust game that Emma's discussed.
Yeah.
When she falls back into somebody's arms, does she have faith that they're there, or does she surrender to them, to the moment? Which is it? In your reality, it's not right.
Faith that they're there.
And to me, it would be surrender, i.e., we don't know if they're going to be able to catch her or not, but she's going to let go anyway and have a go.
But I mean, surely the game would be perfect if the penalty for being wrong was death. I mean, that would be the game.
I've not played that one.
Well, but if you were playing that game, then would it be surrender or faith?
Surrender.
It would be surrender to death. It would be faith that you weren't going to die.
But okay.
If you do it on the cliff edge and your back is facing a precipice, and somebody is between you and that precipice, yeah, and you are tasked with not looking, blindfolded, whatever, and falling back and trusting that the person isn't going to step away and you're going to fall off the cliff.
To me, it would be surrender, because if I would say it was faith, and I don't want to die, then I'm putting some kind of attachment there. Whereas really in the states that we're talking about, I think it's beyond that. We don't know. Who knows? Maybe they'll catch you, maybe you won't, maybe you'll die, maybe you'll fly. Who knows? We don't know. To me, that's
not what Emma meant. Emma didn't want to die because the person didn't catch her in the circle.
Exactly. She didn't. So, but
no, I mean, surely it's obvious that if you played the trust game and the penalty was death, then you wouldn't play it.
No, I wouldn't.
You don't surrender to death,
No, exactly. I wouldn't play it. Exactly. I wouldn't.
So if you were playing the game and the penalty was death, you'd be demonstrating faith that you weren't going to die. That you
or surrender to the fact that I don't have an attachment.
It's not actually that conceptual or theoretical. There are moments when you do have faith that your friend is not going to let you die.
Just being in a car, for example. We were just
being in a car, for example.
Driving analogy, yeah.
Yeah. A motorcyclist with a sidecar and to some lesser degree playing rugby. It's not often that people die, but it's possible.
That's definitely faith, not surrender. Like, I don't get into a car and go, come what may, maybe we'll get there, maybe we don't.
Absolutely.
I have faith that the person driving will drive me to the wherever.
Yeah, I mean, I would rather call it trust. I think faith is not what the word we want to use, but call it trust. It's not surrender. What we're discussing is the relationship between surrender and freedom, isn't it?
Yes, that's where we began.
It's goodbye to yes.
So now that we're a bit clearer about what surrender is I don't care whether I die or not.
Mm-hmm.
Trust is I'm not going to die. But what about freedom? And what's the relationship between freedom and surrender? Surrender is the nth degree of yes. Permission, acceptance, agreement. Who cares? Just do what you want.
I'm just noticing that surrender is yes and freedom is goodbye. And can you surrender your freedom? We've talked about that, haven't we?
I think that's what you are surrendering. Let's take a very simple example. I'd like to go out and see the Walt Disney film tonight. Oh God, really? All right. That's permission. Yeah, okay, I don't mind. That's acceptance. Oh yeah, that sounds good. That's agreement. I don't care where we go. You just take us out. If you change your mind en route, just take me somewhere else. I just want to be with you, my darling. That's surrender. That's the kind of thing we're talking about with yes, isn't it? So you actually surrender.
Those had an associated goodbye.
Sorry?
Each of those outcomes have an associated goodbye.
What are you saying?
Well, if you go to the cinema or she changes her mind and you go for a meal instead, you're not able to stay at home and read a book.
Well, you've given up that
choice. Your freedom to choose what you're going to do. Yeah.
You've said yes. So that was the end of the ability to say no. I don't see any goodbye moment here at all.
Well, I'm talking about surrender and freedom, aren't we? Freedom is a goodbye word.
Yeah. Surrender is a yes. Freedom is a goodbye. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose I need to talk about a serious example, not just going out to the cinema. Doesn't seem like a goodbye moment. All right. So what are we in agreement that you surrender your freedom? That's what the word surrender means, or not?
Ironically, there's freedom in surrender of freedom.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that
Well, I think we need to go there. I think you're right with that. So when we're experiencing freedom, is that not a surrender to an uncontrollable future?
yeah.
So are we saying that each is a component of the other in some way, or each facilitates the other, or they're synonymous? What are we saying? There's a connection between them. We can't say they're synonymous, can we?
No.
Can you just tell me exactly what synonymous means, please?
You can replace one word with the other without changing the meaning in the sentence.
Thank you. No, they're not synonymous.
So we can surrender our freedom, and we are free to surrender. Two different things, aren't they?
Yeah.
The two different things. I'm not sure that that's the second one is exactly. Well, let's talk goodbye. Goodbye is freedom from, isn't it? The freedom that we're talking about in a goodbye is that I'm freedom from all of that. That's how you got to the freedom, and therefore freedom to ... You don't know what's next.
Please, which comes next? Yeah.
Yeah, you got to make up your mind then. Vision.
Yeah.
But the freedom that we're talking about in goodbye is no longer constrained by commitment, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you infer from that there's freedom too, because you're freedom from. But actually, essentially, the word was put in there because it's a freedom from.
There's freedom in surrender as well.
Ooh.
No, there definitely is. I mean, that's why we're discussing it in this way. It's not obvious because there's freedom within surrender. And there could, I mean, this is a very good point, because surrender very often means the opposite of that, is that we're surrendering because we can't have a choice. And we dismissed that at the beginning of this discussion. So when we're actually surrendering as an expression of our freedom, we're experiencing the freedom within surrender. It does feel very liberating to surrender sometimes, doesn't it?
You're not going to have an orgasm unless you surrender, are you?
No.
I mean, in a physiological embodied way, there's got to be a total letting go. And that's the freedom, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
yes and no. I mean, it's a freedom within the experience, but it's not much of a freedom outside of the experience.
Well, that's probably subjective, though.
If you're in the moment when you're ready to release yourself and surrender into the freedom of orgasm, and somebody says, "Wait a minute," the doorbell rings. That moment doesn't feel like freedom, does it?
No,
because you've surrendered, so therefore you're not free. Yeah, okay, that's interesting.
You mean you wouldn't have kind of boundaries, internal boundaries, to block all that out available to you in that state?
Are we talking about the moment of time, the length of time, the situation between the act of surrendering and the decision or the choice about what to do next? Are we talking about that, to quote Emma, liminal space? Is that where the freedom is?
Again, please.
I'm trying to work out where the freedom in surrender is. And does it exist as finitely within a time period, or can it be ongoing? And is it
I think that's a good point.
Is it just I'm going to surrender without deciding what I'm going to do next, and having surrendered, how long do I stay in that state of surrender?
What you're pointing out is that the freedom that we're experiencing within surrender is the fourth keyword, the goodbye moment of surrender. In order to surrender, you have to say goodbye, don't you, to opportunities that exist which do not include surrender. And the freedom that you feel is like, all right, then I'll surrender.
It's momentary.
That's momentary, and that's the goodbye moment of freedom. then somebody has to put a vision into your world to see what you've surrendered to.
Oh, surrendered to.
Well, you do.
Some people, you know, like
to
some people might say that they're doing an ongoing surrender to, for example, being a parent. It might be that that's a really difficult thing. So every day of every year of every decade for quite a while, somebody's going to have to surrender some part of themselves, because some part of themselves has a difficulty with that role or that job, say. That could be an ongoing surrender, though, couldn't it? Every day we get up and we have to surrender to something. I don't mean you have to, but that could be a choice, couldn't it?
I don't think you're going to have the feelings that associate with surrender ongoingly. I think you're going to have moments of doubt about whether or not you've made a good idea, a good decision. You know? And actually, even though you're a parent, you're going to have a babysitter to take things over when you can't cope. You know, I think there are going to be moments when you're going to be imperfect in your surrender to that role. But yeah, on a deep level, you've made your decision, so you better put up with it. You know?
Does living as a monastic, is that an ongoing state of surrender? So living as a monastic.
I think as a mystic, I think the mystic is the only one that actually ongoingly is delighted not to be making up his mind about anything. That the monk is not doing that. But
has the monk not surrendered his personal choice? Is that, I mean, it's not my vibe, but if one were to become a monk, you surrender, and there is theoretically that freedom then from having to decide what to wear, decide what to eat, decide what you're going to do. Is that surrender and freedom kind of, is that where surrender and freedom meet?
That's right. I mean, that's the equivalent argument to the parenting, though. You know, you want to be a monk, you want to be a parent, but not all of the time.
But the freedom to not have to choose. I mean, is that not what people are looking for in that monastic experience? It's the freedom from choice, freedom from, I mean, to me, it sounds incredibly restrictive and like I'd want to jump out the window, but it's technically that is the freedom from day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, we can experience that ourselves without going to these extremes. If you've got a way of being at home, you get up at that time, then you make a cup of tea, and then you light your fire, and then you get the kids sandwiches, and then you do that, and you don't do anything else. That's the only thing that works. If you try to bend the rules, you know you're going to have a problem. That's what you do, and you don't even think about it. You just do that until it's time for a cup of tea at 10 o'clock. That is, in a sense, surrendering to your life rhythm, surrendering to the discipline that you've put on yourself. And you actually, that's quite a nice state of mind. I have it when I go out in the garden. You know, I really don't want to go out in the garden when it's warm indoors. Then I put on my Wellington boots, I go out there, and it's just like, oh yeah, this is where I need to be, you know. And that freedom comes to me when I'm out there doing it. I won't go in until it rains or I'm too tired or whatever it might be. So that's what we're talking about, the freedom that comes having surrendered.
From it's a non-dualistic state. Sorry to use flashy words, but that non-dualism is the freedom.
That's what gives you the freedom, yeah.
And this is the path of joy. We're talking about moving, having walked the path of power. We're now walking from goodbye to yes, which is the path of joy.
Soul. I thought that was
sorry.
Soul. Okay.
Beg your pardon. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Thank you.
And whilst I've been quiet and not actively participating so much, I've been listening. I want to go back to where I started, which I think what we've done is gone in a circular motion between freedom and surrender via walking the path as a path. So I think we've started with goodbye and gone through realization, decision, completion to get to freedom, which then turns into the permission, the acceptance, the agreement to move to surrender. So I'm wondering, I think we will get to the point where those words, freedom and surrender, we don't have to talk about them, they just are because they're states of being. But I think our work is to life work is the right word, our invitation is to walk the path from realization to freedom to permission to surrender. And when we walk that path, the path of soul, that's when those two words in the middle don't have a discussion.
As we discuss those words in the middle, we're discussing very fine points of philosophy, aren't we?
Well, we're going outward and then coming back in, and then going outward and coming back in. Or that's what I've heard as I've been listening. We can't stay in the middle yet. I think we will, and I think that's maybe the ultimate. But I think the path working that we're doing means we have to go from realization to freedom through the words, and then realize that our next step is to walk towards surrender, which starts with permission to go to surrender.